Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa, the headlines. As the floodwaters recede in Mozambique, the death toll rises to over 600. 8 days after Hurricane Idai struck southeast Africa, swathes of the country are in dire need of aid. France 24 visits an emergency shelter in the port city of Beira. Blaring horns and beating drums, hundreds of thousands of Algerians turn out for a fifth consecutive Friday to demand the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. We'll be crossing to the capital. And Washington announces new sanctions against 3 officials from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The USA accusing them of undermining the democratic process during a highly contested presidential election that handed victory to opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi. Thank you very much for joining us. Just over a week after Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi, thousands of people still need rescuing. The South African and Portuguese armies have joined forces to try to reach people cut off by the devastating floods that accompanied the cyclone. But it's a mammoth task. Priority is given to children and the elderly, who are taken by helicopter to emergency centres in the Mozambican city of Beira. Our team on the ground sent us this report.
The Samora Machel school in Beira has been turned into a rescue centre. More than 300 children are cared for here. They don't know where their parents are. Out of desperation, some children were flung into the arms of rescue workers.
Some of the children, they say that they just were handed over with their siblings, and some of the children are under 5. So it's a 2-year-old with a 2-month-old. We have cases of, like this young girl, she's 11, she's HIV positive, so the mother handed her over with her medicine.
A high-profile visitor has arrived to assess the situation. The head of UNICEF only visits extreme disaster areas, and this is exactly what Beira is.
It makes you think of Bangladesh, for when the cyclone comes in and the communities are just flooded. People run to the trees and they seek shelter somewhere, but then we can't reach them. Many of the people do not know how to swim. We now know that we need about $30 million for the 3 countries, so it would be Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe.
About 200 people are brought to the centre every day. Half of them are children. But rescue workers say this is a drop in the ocean, as an estimated 15,000 families are still trapped and waiting for help. Bad weather conditions are hampering rescue operations.
Braving the rain, hundreds of thousands of Algerians have once again taken to the streets across the country, demanding the resignation of their president. Friday's demonstrations mark 1 month since the birth of a protest movement against Abdelaziz Bouteflika's plans to seek a 5th mandate. Critics accusing him of cancelling upcoming elections to maintain his hold on power. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
Defying the rain and the regime. Hundreds of thousands of Algerians have gathered again to call for change. They say they won't be satisfied until their president steps down, and there's a radical overhaul of the establishment.
We are protesting peacefully. These protests have been peaceful from the start, and they'll stay that way until the thieves who have plundered our country leave.
There hasn't been any foreign intervention. It's our business and we're going to resolve it ourselves, peacefully. We want a radical change.
The last 2 Fridays have seen record numbers of protesters hitting the streets, once a rare sight in Algeria. President Bouteflika's 20-year rule had seen little public opposition, until a month ago, when the ailing 82-year-old announced he would run for a 5th term. Bouteflika suffered a stroke in 2013 and is now rarely seen in public. On March 11th, he pulled out of the race, but also postponed the polls. When it became clear he intended to remain in office, the protests resumed. Bouteflika has promised reform, but it may be too little too late. In recent days, key allies have begun distancing themselves from his regime, including the UGTA trade union and the Business Leaders Forum.
Well, for more on this fifth consecutive week of mass demonstrations against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, we can cross now to the Algerian capital to speak with our correspondent there, Monsef Eid Kassi. What's happening where you are, Monsef? How do this week's protests compare to what we've been seeing in previous weeks?
It's actually described as an amazing day. We were expecting less people than the previous Fridays, but there was a huge crowd. Millions of Algerians went in the streets today despite the bad weather, and we could actually, contrary to previous Fridays, it was raining, as I just said, but that did not stop Algerians to go in the streets. There were millions of people across the country to continue the engagement under the rain. Demonstrations actually began at 10 a.m. in Algiers and nothing changed. Algerians want the whole system to leave and say they are angry because of politicians actually who look like they don't want to understand their claims. Which one of the claims and demands is the President Bouteflika cannot extend his fourth term according to their words. Marches were peaceful in general with some new slogans. Get out FLN and RND, to the answer to what has been said by Bouchareb from FLN and Sadiq Shihab from RND. Actually, these two political parties are very close to the government and wanted to go in the streets, but people don't want them to be with them.
Now, we know that protesters have been calling, of course, for Bouteflika to step down. They want a date to be scheduled for new elections. Are their demands evolving at all?
Demonstrators in the streets are actually still waiting for a response, but now they are organizing actually themselves to carry on this popular movement, and they are already calling for a next mobilization, across this week and also the weekend. So the government didn't say anything for the moment and still wants, by what is Lamamra saying during his visits to Germany and Russia, that the government is still keeping his position. And now the demonstrators want to say to this government to leave. And now we are expecting other marches.
Monsef Eid Kassi in Algiers, thank you very much indeed for that update. The race is on to qualify for the final places in this year's Africa Cup of Nations tournament. While teams including Tunisia, Egypt and Senegal can sit pretty through these final days of qualifying matches, Saturday is going to be decisive for former hosts Cameroon. All they need is a draw to make it through, but their Comoros adversaries would need a win. And on Sunday, there's another key match between Libya and South Africa. Only the victors of that game will make it to Egypt this June. At least 60 people have been killed in a head-on collision between two packed buses in Ghana. After the crash, one vehicle caught fire, with many still trapped inside. Survivors reported that their driver had been feeling tired but had refused to take a break. Ghana's vice president offering his condolences via Twitter, saying that the time had come to adopt new safety measures to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Washington has slapped sanctions on 3 senior officials from the Democratic Republic of Congo's election commission. They're accused of obstructing the democratic process in the run-up to the country's contested presidential election on the 30th of December. Opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi was declared the surprise winner amid widespread concerns about the vote's integrity. Our correspondent in the country, Thomas Nicolan, explains.
The United States Treasury said in a statement that the presidential election in DR Congo, which was the first ever democratic transfer of power in this country, failed to ensure that the vote reflected the will of the Congolese people. The US Treasury has decided to sanction the president of the Electoral Commission, Corneille Nangaa, as well as 2 of his collaborators. According to the US, these 3 officials obstructed and delayed the preparation of the election, which was due to be held in 2016, but which was eventually held in December 2018. According to the US, there was corruption related to the procurement of the voting machines which were used during the vote, but the US also accuses Corneille Nangaa of embezzling money that was meant to finance the election into shell companies, and the US also accuses these 3 officials of bribing justices on Congo's top court in order to approve the delay of the presidential election. It is interesting to note that the US is sharply criticizing the conduct of the election in DR Congo, but still recognized the election of Felix Tshisekedi and said it was committed to working with his government.
Thomas Nicolan reporting there from Kinshasa. Well, that's all we have time for right now. Thank you very much for watching, and do stay tuned. There's more world news coming up in just a few minutes' time.